Hello, party people, and welcome to Word Haven. You're joined by Kid and Seth. Seth doesn't have a last name, but he is findable actually on the internet under paralysis or death, which he found written on a trampoline one day.
Yes, it was on a scroll in the hand of a mummified corpse of Hermes Trismegistus at the bottom of a pyramid.
Yeah, so speaking of shit we don't understand well, but are gonna try our best at, we're joined today to talk about Revelations. And I've troubled with this book before. It's confused me various times. But this is great to want to talk about because I ended up doing a deep dive into some of the symbolism of it and doing some of the reading on it. And I thought maybe I'd give some of my spiel to Seth, um, and then he could be our man on the street. And then to all the Christians out there, I want to state that I'm wearing a Saint Vitus shirt. That is the cross of Saint Peter. Okay, that's not some goth girl crap. Okay, that's a cross of Saint Peter for God's sake.
Definitely not St. Andrew's cross either.
What you say?
It's definitely not St. Andrew's cross either.
No, no. Um, and then Saint Vitus is good for if you have Tourette's, because it's a mini seizure, because he's the god for dance and seizure, I believe, or the saint. There, I'm already blasphemous. So let's jump in. Okay, so I wanted to start this by saying that I'm going to reference. I think we're going to reference the Kabbalah a fair bit. So just for people who might not be aware of it, um, there's very, very complicated systems within the Kabbalah, but one system that I use, and I think Seth has some knowledge of, is the Tree of Life with the 10 Sephirot. Um, and for those who might not be aware of that, it matches pretty well the 10 minor arcana, the 10 numbered cards of the minor arcana in four suits, because there's four worlds in the structure of the Tree of Life. So it's 10 Sphirot listed in four worlds. So very similar to the structure of the minor arcana, and then the minor arcana's court cards also correspond to some of those. There's various methods of corresponding these. So I'm just going to give my interpretation of some of the symbolism in Revelations, and we can debate it in various ways. So I wanted to start by, I was watching a rabbi on YouTube talk about 666 because I was trying to jump into understanding the symbolism of 666. And he'd mentioned that whenever a word is repeated three times in scripture, it's supposed to be complete. So that's why the angels say Kadosh, 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 or holy, holy, holy. Yeah, it's getting kind of interesting, right? So 666 would then be an idea of completely six rather than necessarily the numeral 666. Now, it's also, interestingly enough, the number that Solomon counted after he had engaged in trade in various areas. The total that he collected each year was 666 coins. So then 666 would be the completion of trade in the world.
Wow.
Yeah, kind of interesting. Yeah. And so, Seth, you might be familiar with these ideas that Pageau, am I saying his name correctly?
Say again, sorry.
Jonathan Pageau and Matthew Pageau.
Oh yeah, Canadian guys.
Yeah, okay. Well, they talk about this symbolism of six as completion and seven as beyond completion, which is written about in Matthew Pageau's book. But the idea is basically that the radial line of a circle can be mapped around the circumference of a circle six times, and then the seventh time is an incomplete one. And so I believe that incomplete one would be half of pi. I could be getting my numbers wrong here. But then it would be incalculable. So that which is calculable is related to the six, and that which is incalculable is related to the seventh.
Incompletion.
Yeah. So in Revelations, it is said that six is the number of a man. So man was created on the sixth day, and then the seventh day is the day of rest. And then the beast of Revelations is wounded on the seventh head. So the idea being that the six heads are complete, and then the seventh head is incomplete. So six is an attempt to have complete control over the world as we know it. And so the 6 directions of north, south, east, west, up, and down. And then the 7th would be an element added or not added to that, but it would be the incalculable, because of the nature of the radius and the circumference, and because of the infinite incalculability or calculability of pi. Okay, we're there on this so far.
Okay, yeah, I'm sure. Okay, yep.
So Tractung Rinpoche talks about on one of the episodes of the podcast, The Freedom Place, the reason that 6 is the number of God, 6 is the number of Lucifer, and 7 is the number of God, being that if you are working through the chakras in some manner, not just I read a chakra book over the weekend and I'm feeling like identifying like the Godhead this morning, but you're actually working through them, you will reach a point where you are feeling like the Godhead. But the way that Tractung Rinpoche explains it is that an individual cannot make the final leap into realization. They need to be pushed, because you're just not going to do it. But so when you reach the 6th, you feel the infinite bliss of identification with the Godhead, but you're not submerged and subsumed within union with the Godhead. So that would be Lucifer Morning Star. That would be the identification of the individual's luminosity, but still reified as an individual before they're nullified in divinity. Okay, I've not experienced this. I'm talking about something I heard on a podcast, right? But it tracks, because what happens with the beast in Revelations, or one of the many beasts in Revelations, is that, and Jonathan Pageau explains this, he falls into the water and then he rises up out of the water. So if we look at this with the tree of life symbolism, it's like the beast is no longer identified with the supernals, because if Malkut is earth, and Seth, you'll have to let me know if this is true. Is there a correlation in the languaging of any of these traditions that correlate planets with stars?
Yeah, definitely.
Okay. So what is said in Revelations is that the beast, I believe it's his tail, swipes down 1/3 of the stars in the sky. So from Malkut, the lowest of the 10 Sephiroth, which would be the 10 cards in the Minor Arcana, from Malkut is Earth. So you have 9 stars in the sky. So what is sweeping down 1/3 of the stars in the sky? It's tearing away from the 3 supernals. So and then the beast with its 7 heads rises up out of the ground, or out of the water. And so it's no longer identifying with the divine. It's identifying with its 7 heads. And so it has 10 horns. So it has all aspects of divinity, because nothing is separated from divinity, but it doesn't identify with the divinity. It identifies with its emergence from the plane.
Right. Interesting. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I was thinking a couple things there, like, so just fun thing, that the old Greek word for planet means wandering star.
Okay.
Because they thought the planets were stars. And in the old cosmologies, where like you have like there's like the Earth, and then there's like a concentric circle related to each planetary realm expanding around it. Like you look at like medieval cosmology or something. There's 7 planets traditionally. So there's the Earth, there's the 7 spheres, and then in this schema, and this is Hermetic Kabbalah at least, I don't know about other forms, but since we're referring to the court cards, I think it's relevant. But so at the end of the 7, there's the 8th sphere, which is the fixed stars, which is the rest of the stars in the sky, or the zodiac. So the farthest out, you have the 7 stars, the planets are moving, and then you have the rest. And then beyond that is the, unutterable, or whatever. The complete, the incalculable, perhaps. So I would imagine if he's swiping out 1/3 of the stars, yeah, it could be like you're saying, where there's There's 3 remaining if you take out the bottom ones. Or it could be if he's like swiping out swaths of the fixed star segment, where there's zillions of them. But one potential discrepancy is, at least in most of the systems I've seen, like the upper 3 supernals wouldn't be given stars or correspondences like that, because they're, you can't separate them, and they're beyond conventional knowing, I suppose.
Yes, they weren't given any sort of correspondences until later Kabbalah, right?
I mean, yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah. So, but what I am seeing, and this is interesting, so you have this play between. I was thinking about how interesting this number 666 is as it pertains to maybe the number 1,000, where it's like it's kind of the number 6, but it's kind of the number 7. And so it's this wounded head of the beast, where it's like, yeah, you're related to the Godhead, but it's still all about you and your relationship to the Godhead, which seems to be what happens in the beast. And then this imagery of the radius and the radian line is really interesting when it comes to. Well, I've been thinking about it with this beast, but also a lot of the symbolism of that. So I'm looking at the horn and C.S. Lewis's animal here, because the horn is also a radian line, and the beasts in Revelations have horns. They have diadems, which is a crown. These are all radian lines, and they have eyes, which are drawn like radian lines, but also perceive like radian lines. So these are ways to see all around. And then if the lamb if the lamb of Revelations has 7 eyes, 7 of the radiant lines is what makes an entire circle. So I'm saying this poorly, right? Because my understanding of math is poor enough that I'm confusing radians with radiuses. I understand that much, but
I was just going to ask about that. Yeah. Or rays. Ray is like, it comes outward from a point, and a radian, I think, is circumscribing a circle in a lower resolution fashion, right?
Yes, but the radian would be the length of the radius's arc if drawn along the circumference, and it would take 6 complete ones and then 1/7 that is incomplete.
Oh, okay, so it's a fraction of the circumference.
Yeah. But it would take 6 and a remainder. Yeah. So that the idea then is that if 666 is all that Solomon was able to gather in trading with various peoples of the world, then it's the attempt at complete control of the so-called physical world.
Yeah.
And then what's left over.
Yeah. I mean, that's an interesting point, because to me it seems like Revelation is really dealing with, and like most actual mystical traditions and teachings and prophetic literature and stuff seem to be about the relationship between heaven and earth, or what is the creation and the divine, and like how does one go back and forth, or how does one come out of the other, or what's the hierarchy, or and it's interesting if we were talking about like a simple dichotomy like that. I like your setup is interesting too, because if what goes beyond the created realm, or 6, say 6 is a created world or earth or man or whatever, and that is complete, and then what is beyond is the incomplete or the incomprehensible, or I forget the other term you used. You add more.
Yeah, incalculable is one that is showing up a little bit, because so Jonathan Pagiel compares the Beast of Revelations with Tim Cook.
Okay.
The CEO of Apple. But he's saying, what is the attempt to, because in Revelations, anyone without the mark of the beast cannot trade. And so what does that mean? And I have my own biases when I look at this book. But it seems to be that without a certain like the beast attempts to claim that all is its territory. actually the
Yeah.
beast along with the beast attempts to claim. There's sort of like a trumpeter next to it. And so they run this like interesting con show of like really it's the beast who comes with the beast, which is actually like a it mirrors the story. I think if it's is it Nebuchadnezzar who like he is assigned to make a structure that everyone should worship. So they kind of work together. You have the guy who comes to town as the what's the old musical? The Music Man, who's kind of saying, you know, everybody come on, worship the beast.
Yeah, yeah.
And then you have the beast. But it's attempting to bring forth all that is on the earth together. You know, and attempts to create a unified structure. And then it's Bishop, what's his name? I have it up here because I was listening to him earlier on this. It's Bishop Barron. It's kind of interesting to think about in this because he says like that there's this criticism of these emanationist ideologies that like they're hierarchical, but then you have this emergent like philosophies that come out of kinds of nihilism, which they're the reverse of it, but they're still hierarchical in that like they assume that no version of interpretation is real, but they still believe in the surfacing up of emergent phenomena, which is akin to, in my interpretation here, the rising of the beast from the waters, because it falls, but then it goes, no, I'm actually rising out of the waters.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah, like you're always representing and paying homage to the divine hierarchy and structure, whether you want to or not. But your homage might be a parody of it, in that it's going the wrong direction or it's corrupted.
Yeah, so mileage may vary. I mean,
yeah. It reminds me too of like, you know, it's like Revelation is like the opposite of Genesis in a way, right? And like, because Genesis is creation ex nihilo or whatever, maybe the coming down or the coagulation, if you want to speak out chemically or whatever, incarnation of the world or and stuff. And Revelation is when all that stuff, you know, is destroyed or resumed unto the nothingness. And you know, Revelation, of course, is a revealing, or Apocalypse is a revealing. And I think that's one of the reasons so many esoteric groups are obsessed with the book of Revelation, because it's in many ways it represents the great realization or the end point, or like, you know, it looks terrifying, but it also can be wondrous or what have you. So there is a sense of like a, you know, a going up or becoming erect or returning to the sky from the earth or the waters or whatever. I could see that in there for sure.
Yeah, what's interesting, I think about what I think is interesting about the Book of Revelations, if my interpretation of it is correct, which I should stop saying because as the Israeli politician once said, "Don't be so humble. You're not that great." But if my interpretation stands, then it's like it's actually not a book about the revelation of divinity to everyone, and it's not a book about all you sinners dying. It's like both books, so it's extremely weird. And it's also like it's easy to interpret as, okay, this is about all those sinners and ex-girlfriends of mine burning in hell forever, but it's really like not all of me is going to make it to the other side, you know. And the book is actually it's not actually a nuanced interpretation I have, because the book is like really clear that this dude is running around with a horse with a sword coming out of his mouth, you know, and he's going to separate those two out. And the idea that all of Kid me would make it to the other side doesn't make sense, because he's very clear that y'all are going to need new bodies after this shit is over. Right. Because he's going to fucking wreck you.
And all the references to like Nebuchadnezzar and the idolaters and the bringing together of the created world and stuff is like, you're saying the people that refuse to take the final jump because they're trying to like build up some kind of raft that will last forever across the chaotic waters of dissolution.
Well, that'd be cool. I mean, I don't know. And I also don't know. It seems like it's funny because as I did research on this, like, I'm like, don't listen to the conspiracy theories. And I'm like, some of these are kind of dope, you know, because I imagine that not everybody goes through Revelations at the same time, you know, like I imagine that if you had like complete full realization of the nature of mind, you would have like finished Revelations a long time ago. You would need Jesus to come down and all these horsemen to run around. But yeah, it seems to be like it seems to be, that's my interpretation of it, at least, is that, like, it's like Trungpa Rinpoche says, like, you can't get enlightened, you have to die. Mm-hmm. It's like, yeah, like some of that is just going to be left, but that also, there's also, that doesn't mean that these patterns can't emerge in the future as they've emerged in the past.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, that reminds me. Sorry.
Yeah, go on.
Oh, I had two thoughts from that. One is like, if I kind of refer again to this dichotomy of heaven and earth, or like the divine and the created or whatever, there's like, you can have two perspectives where you have like the view from below and the view from above, right? And the view from below is, to me, sounds like the description you gave at the beginning, where like, oh, man is complete. I see completeness here. Where is being? It's right here. Where is being? It's this object. This is one, And then the incomprehensible looks incomplete. What the hell? Can't see it, can't, don't know. But the view from above, man is incomplete. Man is fallen. Man is whatever. The created world doesn't satisfy. Everything goes away. There's no self, blah, 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 And, uh-oh. I was going with that. All right, second thought. Come back to the first one. The other thing about the person that can't take the final leap and gets up to that level of realization and falls off, it sounds so much, at least in this description, like Aleister Crowley's description of the Black Brothers in Thelema, which is an unfortunate term in today's world. But regardless, what he was saying is, I mean, this is a person who has tremendous awakenings, one after another, whatever, and then he gets up to the precipice of what Crowley calls the abyss, which is when all of your great virtues abandon you, including your angelic connection to the divine, and you have to cross the abyss. And those that fail, or that come across this ordeal too soon, latch onto their ego and like hold onto it so tightly and try to like trump that up, fueled by all their great realizations and wisdom that they now have. And Crowley says that this will cause you to disintegrate into madness, because in truth you have to completely even lose all of that to get across that abyss.
Yeah, so it's interesting. There's a very simple version of this in the Bible, which is it's gone over in my Catholic sci-fi book. I'll plug that right there. But it's that after you sweep your house clean of evil spirits, the evil spirit that was in it leaves, and he comes back and he meets 7 other evil spirits, and everything's clean, so they move right in. And so in my sci-fi novel, this guy's being followed by this evil jinn, and they're like, "Why don't you kill it?" And he's like, "Yeah, it's gonna get worse if I do that." So
yeah.
But yeah, I mean,
yeah, go on. Oh, it's like the great saints who have purified themselves so much are just still tormented by how much of a wretch they are, because they can see so much more clearly than before, when they actually were more of a wretch and they just didn't bother them as much.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting to sit here and criticize the Black Brothers, and then I want to add Crowley to those lists because I don't think he made it, but like, I'm not even at that abyss. So like, I'm just like a guy like commenting on Olympic gymnasts on YouTube saying their form was off.
Totally. I mean, I think I remember the thing I was going to say about that earlier too, is because it's like, yeah, I mean, there's one way to talk about realizations and levels and stuff like that is like terminal and specific events. Like, here's the abyss, people can get to it or not, etc. And this is the view again from the human perspective, going on the path, this. But they're also, if you're looking from the top, and time is measured by that. So it's less of a when does realization happen, or revelation, the book, occur for individuals, as much as if you just viewed all of time and creation from there. It's not. I'll keep losing my point here. What the hell? I mean,
that has been having cognitive dissonance that I think it'd be easier for him if he just claimed higher levels of realization and then didn't worry about, but he's being humble.
But I'm a humble being. What are you gonna do? But yeah, it's like I mean, is there one unified abyss experience, or is it a fractal that has the thing over and over again here and there? Or even once you go through the entire realization cycle, do you have to go through it again at another level? I think yes, you know. So
Yeah,
like
yeah, that's fair. That's fair.
yeah,
So
so in that sense, if you take someone like Crowley, like yeah, he crossed an abyss for sure. Like I don't doubt that. Did he cross the
mhm.
great abyss? Is there a yet another one? You know, like what's the level? I don't
Yeah,
know.
and as Tyler the Creator tells us, men telling women how their body's supposed to be, but never take advice from any fella with a lean gut.
Yeah.
We're really outsiders in Crowley's personal experience there. Okay, I wanted to share some more thoughts, and I wanted to jump into Northrop Frye here because this is interesting. So all the gold is collected to create the number 666, but that's back in Solomon, but it's a reference back to that. And so this is really interesting because the streets are paved with gold in the New Jerusalem, the Revelations. And Rabbi Sobel on YouTube was talking about how, okay, that's the dust under your feet all of a sudden is the gold of the world. It's no longer has the value it did. But
Nice.
there's also, let me quote Northrop Frye here, and I got to use his voice a little bit because it's so good. I wrote it down with the stutters and everything because I'm obsessed with this man. Okay. In the book of Revelations, the New Jerusalem is described in terms of gold and as having 12 gates, which are each one a precious stone or jewel. And that in its turn is the antitype of the breastplate of the high priest Aaron, which contained 12 precious stones for the 12 tribes of Israel. So, this city of gold in precious stones is not given you in the Bible because the narrators, well, it's not there because the narrators are vulgar. And it's not there solely for its place as the antitype of something mentioned in the First Testament. The gold and precious stones are there to suggest a city burning with the fire of life. That is a city which is constantly burning but is not burning up. The fire is an image of life and exuberance and energy, but not of torment and destruction. If you set a bird on fire, you will get, of course, a phoenix. So I added that before because it was such a funny quote. That's from his lecture series, The Bible and Literature. That's in lecture 7. But it kind of fits because Jonathan Pageau talks about the Antichrist as being being Christianity without Christ. So that's setting birds on fire instead of having a phoenix.
Uh-huh. Sure. Makes sense. Makes sense. Um, yeah, it's interesting too, like a lot of these, to whatever degree it was intended or not, when these texts were written, the way that they show up now a lot of the times, these numbers are like these things you can refer to and look at, like, okay, 12 stones on the breastplate of the Urim Thummim or whatever, right? Oh, 12, and so you follow these certain numbered, like in the Revelation, 7 shows up a bunch of times, right? There's like 7 churches and there's the 7 stars and there's 7 heads. Are there 12 heads, 12 eyes, 7 horns, or vice versa, or something on the lamb,
Okay,
7
so
seals?
yeah, I mean, it depends on the animal you're talking about. The lamb, I believe, has 7 horns and 7 eyes. The one of the beasts has 7 heads and 10 diadems. One may have 7 heads and 7 diadems, or horns and diadems. And then there's 7 hills, which are the hills of Rome.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
But yeah, you were saying about the numbers.
No, I was just saying whether or not it was intended or not, because you have these repetitive numbers that refer to different things throughout this and the other books. I mean, of course, like one or many esoteric systems is going to arise out of this, because you're like, okay, here's the 7, especially like the Revelation, like commonly people look at it on like, say like the 4 worlds or various levels of emanation, so like you have the 7 churches, maybe they're on, they're in the churches in Asia, right? Which can mean Ossia, perhaps, like they're on the material plane, they're the lowest level of the 7. Then you got a higher level of the 7, and like there was second world Yetzirah, maybe it's the 7 torches or this, I'm not sure. I'm getting everything all tortified here. But
Wait. But you have to go back for a second because you said Asia, you were doing some correspondence of the meaning of that name, that word.
With Ossia, which is pronounced terribly from my mouth, but it's the lowest of the 4 worlds in Hermetic Kabbalah.
Okay, so you're corresponding Asya, the lowest world of the four worlds of the Kabbalah, which would pertain to the suit of coins and tarot.
Right.
With the word Asia.
Potentially, yeah. I'm just giving one example because if you look at like symbols, like if you take everything that I wish I had a chart or something, but every time 7 shows up, say in that book, you're like, hey, it's like heads, torches, stars, churches, blah blah blah, right?
Diadems,
To me,
crowns.
yeah, but aren't there 10 of those?
One of the beasts, yeah.
Okay, yeah. Anyway, I mean, if you just look at what the symbol is, like a church is a material manifestation, like an earthly manifestation of a house of worship, right? A star is a more elevated, incorporeal thing. A crown, also a diadem, is like something you wear on the top, like Kethers on the top. I'm just saying, like churches could be Ossia or like the bottom material level.
Yeah. So, well, I'll say something about what I think those may mean, and they may not. But again, some of these have radial symbolism. So, again, if there is this correspondence between the vectors that come out of the center of a circle with the distance of a radius and the circumference, that relationship being between 6 and 7 of those making up the full circle.
Yeah.
And those, so some of these images happen to have the form of a radius. So that's how a crown fits on your head. It's a little more narrow than it is wide.
Yeah.
That's how a mountain is shaped. There happen to be 7 mountains of Rome. And that's the shape of a horn, which is, and it is the vision through an eye. So a lot of those 7s have that imagery within the Book of Revelations. Now, there's 2 correspondences that I see in the book that I think are different from each other, let alone whether or not you can believe that they're part of this book. Now, I will say about correspondences that I'm realizing that it's not only as broad as not all systems are interoperable, it's that not all practices are interoperable. So it could be that there's various valid interpretations of one book by various practices. Now, but I'll go on to say that I'm thinking about this correspondence with the Tree of Life, because the basic breakdown of the structure of the Tree of Life into 4 worlds is that you have the first 2 Sephiroth forming the highest world, the third Bina forming the second, the middle 6 forming the Ruach, the spirit, central body, and then the 7th being the Malkuth. So here's our 7, and then the Book of Revelation seems to be, and this is me putting forth my thesis once more, which is, if from the version of Malkuth you have 9 remainder, and then if you sweep down 3 of those, you're saying all we have is the bottom 7, which means all we have is the physical world and the motion and emotions and thoughts about it, which seems to be the nihilist worldview.
Yeah.
It seems to be, we're going to keep everything that divinity has offered us, but we're not going to admit its claim. So it's not, you can't actually create a world outside of divinity, but you can sweep that under the rug.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. So that's what I'm seeing from the book. Although it is a little weird, because if you're looking at this chakra model, the 7th is above the 6, and if you're looking at a model of the tarot or the of the Kabbalah, it's the six is above the kingdom of Malkut. Malkut is Hebrew for kingdom, right? Getting that right? Um, and that would actually be under it. So the correspondences there get a little funky, and also the correspondence of like, okay, is there a correspondence between the tree of life and the chakra system, and what would that be? That's a whole nother can of worms.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I mean, I certainly think it's a lot of systems are not correlative very well. But I think there is like a basic structure that we can point out from looking at this book, and that's what we're doing by throwing different systems ideas on it and seeing what it looks like, you know. And even like talking about like the circle, you're talking about vectors from the center and the radians of the circle. I mean, it's like, what's a circle? It's, you know, it's a series of infinite series of points, round lines circumscribed around a single center, you know, which is like the famous, you know, God is a circle whose center is everywhere and whose circumference is nowhere. Because the circumference is the thing that comes from the center and reveres the center and looks to the center, right? It's the secondary or the lesser or the created world where we have spatial directions or however you want to look at it. And the center is the origin point, you know, just like a mountain or a horn or whatever, right? There's the singular peak and then emanation or the 10,000 things, or the created world or the whatever comes off of it. So I think, I mean, it's like that structure makes sense, and that structure makes sense if you would see across various systems and within this book also. And like your reading of like, you know, maybe being, to use these terms, like at the periphery of the circle or the bottom of the mountain or the created world or the kingdom, and this sweeping away recognition of the higher upon which the lower depends would be a problem.
Yeah, and then well, okay, so maybe it could be more general than kids weaponized autistic tarot interpretation and Kabbalah interpretation, because you know 1/3 of the stars in the sky is also okay. What is the Trinity? It's 1/3 of the Trinity. Then you know.
How do you mean?
Well, I mean to suggest that it's this idea that we're going to not acknowledge God. We're going to acknowledge the physical world, and we're going to acknowledge some sort of, the ruach is often associated with motion, right? And so we're going to acknowledge motion and emotion. We're going to acknowledge the physical world, but we're not going to acknowledge anything beyond that. And that seems to be the nihilist claim. Yeah. So
it kind of reminds me of like you know, Noah's Ark in Genesis too, right? It's like similar storyline, like mankind ceases to recognize that, which is divine. And so what does God do? He's like tells certain protagonists to make a way to traverse this, while then he just amplifies what the created world is already, which is like flux and change, dissolution, death, and wipes the whole thing clean. You know. Although the symbolism of the ark and one person riding something which outlasts the flood is, I don't know how that would correlate.
Well, it seems, I mean, a lot of the meaning of waters, there's a lot of meanings of waters, I believe, in within the Bible, but one of the meanings of floods and is its chaotic nature.
Yeah.
And that is that you will be swept away in the chaos that you create through whatever the Judeo-Christian word for samsara is.
Yeah.
So I wanted to share one more Northrop Frye quote, which I thought this was pretty interesting. He says, "The Bible does not regard the world ruler as necessarily an evil person, but he rules over the kind of world in which sooner or later one of his descendants is going to be so." So I've had a lot of trouble understanding this book, or the Book of Revelations, from what it means in terms of trade, because there's a lot of mention of trade, and I'm really biased because want it to say what I want it to say. And I'm not sure that it does.
Mm.
Yeah. But it's very clearly a book about trade in some ways, which might dovetail into talking about the Four Horsemen, if you're ready for that.
Yeah, sure.
So this is interesting, and the closest I got to trying to understand them is through Emmett Fox, which is really interesting, because he's a really matter of fact, down to earth Christian thinker, and he's just like, well, man has four qualities, and they're the physical world and his emotions and his intellect and the spirit. And you're like, oh,
Yeah.
this is so wonderful, and you're
Totally.
right. But of course, it does what I wanted to do, which is correspond to the four worlds.
Yeah. Yeah.
But what makes it tricky is the meanings of trade in it, because for instance, the Black Horseman, or the Black Horse, I should say, he carries a scale, and he says, a one quart of wheat for a denarius, 3 quarters of barley for a denarius, or 3 quarts of barley for a denarius. And he's thought of as famine. And so it's interesting. I mean, actually, it's probably not, it doesn't have to be as deep as I'm making it, right? It's kind of clearly, okay, he corresponds with this to intellect. And he corresponds each of these to one of those four worlds, but very essentially the four suits of the tarot are the four worlds of the Tree of Life.
Uh-huh.
Oh.
Yeah. Yeah, it'd be interesting. I mean, the trade thing is interesting too to me, because like what the book meant when it was written with all the specific references of the time versus what it means to us now, it's different, of course. And even like people having readings of being like, oh, 666 means Nero, the emperor that was persecuting the Christians, or something like that.
This is because of the value of the letters when you correspond the order of the letters to numerical equivalents. Yeah.
Sure. Yeah, but I just mean like with readings like that, it's like, yeah, that could be the case, but that's not what the book means to us anymore, So like, it's like the idea, like the new covenant, part of the idea of the new covenant of Christ was that you had the Old Testament, and the Old Testament was a specific set of teachings and relations of this Judaic people of this ancient world, and that's pretty removed from us. But that it portends the New Testament, which is when they're saying this will become a religion of man, right? This will escape mere ethnic and racial relevance and become a worldwide religion, in which case, the specifics of the people and the time and the politics have to get generalized. And part of this is like esoteric reading, like you read something that was written for someone else and you find something relevant to you and your time in it, but like the whole thing extrapolates and opens like that. So it like, I think it can be both. It can be, if it was relevant to trade at the time in very specific ways. And now what this book's purpose is symbolizing, at least to me, is like it's capping off the Bible, right? It's like it's the realization of the truth, it's the revelation unto man, it's the returning unto heaven, it's all of those things, because they're all the same thing,
Yeah, and so
individually.
What was that last part?
I was just saying, whether you're applying it on a sociological scale or within an individual soul, same.
Yeah, so the Bible in general is hyperlinked in a very strange way. And Northrop Frye expresses how biblical metaphor operates, because it's sort of like Sodom is Babylon.
Okay. Yep. Cool.
And so it's these various things that are hyperlinked. So like the seven hills are the seven hills of Rome. But if they were just the seven hills of Rome, this wouldn't be the book of Revelations. This would be
Correct.
an interesting record of the history of Rome.
Yeah.
But they didn't decide to end the Bible with an interesting record of the history of Rome. They decided to end the Bible with a man with a sword coming out of his mouth.
Yeah, totally. And the lamb returning, and all these references.
Yeah, okay, so that's the other interesting thing about this, because I failed to mention that, and this has gone over in the Meditations in the Tarot. So this is so dope, because this is really the Dzogchen of the Book of Revelations, which is, he says that there's two things that happen in Revelations. One is there's a war between the dragon and what he calls the archist strategist Michael.
Wow.
So there's a war going on. And at the same time as that, there is another thing happening, which is the lion shall lie down with the lamb. And so it's almost, to me, that like from the perspective of, you're talking about these two different directions. It's like from the perspective of the man struggling against divinity, there's a war.
Yeah.
But from the perspective of divinity, the lion shall lie down with the lamb.
Yeah. Nice.
Okay. So that tracks. Okay, cool. So there's a few things I wanted to share, if I may keep going at it.
Yeah.
All right. So this is so freaking cool. Okay, check this out. This is from the chapter on force, or the letter on force from Meditations in the Tarot. Now the waters which pour out of the mouth of the serpent sweep away, whilst those of the sea of glass, like crystal, before the throne illumine. And just as the collective participation of virgin nature, the sea of glass before the throne, is accompanied by the collective reaction of this perception, perpetual adoration by the four holy creatures, so also there is in fallen nature a reaction to the waters of the serpent swallowed up by the earth, namely the beast of the apocalypse. The apocalypse does not designate them by the term living creatures, or Zun, which it uses to designate the four before the throne, but rather by the term beast, to therion, Latin bestia. Thus it opposes animality and bestiality. Genuine animality is holy, bestiality is degenerate. We with me so far?
That's rad. Yep.
That's freaking rad. Okay, so what Revelations does, what Meditations does, which is so well done in my estimation, is it creates a meaning for these four beasts and the four Hayot, the holy living creatures. Now it creates four beasts, I think it says here, including the false prophet, who is a human beast. So this is interesting. So he creates these four meanings that he corresponds to various traditions, or says is represented in these various traditions of those four beasts. So he claims that the reason that the bull is worshipped in India is as the bull is representation of concentration. Now, it can be diluted concentration, which is the bestial version of it, or it can be the virtue of concentration. He claims that the lion is courage, the eagle is inspiration, but it can be corrupted, as it was within Nazism, as a striking eagle. Mm-hmm. And then the Hayot of the angel or human, it is reason. I think I did those well. They're a little difficult to correspond to the four worlds there.
Makes sense. Yep.
Yeah. So yeah, creates this idea that those can be bestial or they can be divine.
Yeah. And I think, tying that in makes sense to me also, because the holy living creatures, they show up in Ezekiel first, right? And then they show up somewhere else, I think, in the book. And then they're not in like, explicitly in Revelation, right?
No,
But it makes sense to tie them together, like this thing that we're saying, because like there is this hyperlinked sort of like thread through the Bible, often notable by certain numbers that show up. It's an easy way to find it. But like to be like, oh, these whatever is for referenced in Revelation could be a development of a reference to a different stage in those four creatures, or you know.
Yeah, so he puts them around the sea of glass in Meditations, because the sea of glass is like the pristine, serene, equanimous nature of the phenomena around divinity, or the phenomena experienced through divinity, that has perception and then a natural reaction. So the glass of the sea is pristine and like a mirror. And then you have the four creatures. So those are those qualities of courage, concentration, inspiration, and reason. I think it's reason. As they are able to naturally perceive and react. And then when those reactions become corrupt, that's what he's considering falling nature and bestiality.
Yeah.
Now, some correspond those four to the four worlds. Do you do that in your system?
No.
No.
I mean, I don't see why you couldn't, you know, if like esoteric numerology is like, if there's four, you split things into four, you should be able to find the correspondent four qualities in any four objects you come across, you know, at least that's the idea.
Yeah, and the danger that I probably have, so there's a, Sanchen says there's a failure in every success and a success in every failure. Right? So if I am to have a success, my failure is that I'm filing something away before I've read it. You know, I work for an acupuncturist, and part of my job is to make her do her job. So I put her files out and I say, did you finish these?
Yeah, nice.
You know, and so the danger of these correspondences is that I file it away before I've done it.
Yeah. Yeah, sure. Well, I mean, the correspondence is, all of this is there to help people get to penetrate the hidden meaning and understanding of a limited physical representation or a text or a story, right? So it's like, people get lost in them forever and completely miss every point there. But it's also to just like pour over them and come to a more deep understanding of what seems to be the actual core meaning of whatever you're looking at.
Yeah, so there is a meaning for another correspondence is the Hebrew letter Samak has a value of 60. Right. And through my system and the system of meditations in the tarot of Valentin Tomberg, it corresponds to the card the Devil in the tarot. Some may correspond it differently, but one of the significances of 60 in Hebrew is that fire is one. They say fire is 1/60th of hell.
Okay.
And there are various correspondences of 1/60th. So I believe Sabbath, the seventh day, because man was created on the sixth day, and the Sabbath is the seventh day. Yep. Sabbath is supposed to be 1/60th of the world to come. Right. And so I've been thinking about this symbolism a little bit, because Semek also means, one of the meanings of Semek is to create these. You create these memory triggers. I can't remember the word for this, memetics. But you're supposed to create them in study of tarot, of Torah, and one of all these numerology is one method of creating these reminders. And so I'm starting to think maybe these reminders are 1/60th of Torah understanding.
Nice. Yeah, totally. Yeah, that's rad. All the stuff in the ancient world with people like having much greater memories than we do, even the memory palace stuff, just to like get through and internalize these texts.
What did you say, memory palace?
Yeah, like all the Ars Notoria of like, people still do this now to memorize large things, but it was, as far as I understand, a much larger part of scholasticism and studying and reading texts in the old world. You had a bigger brain, bigger mind. than we do now. There's even one of my favorite ones is I think it's called the Hexastichion, or I'm sure I'm brutalizing that, but it's a Renaissance era text with all these like crazy ass images of like, just psychedelic shit. And people often read it as an alchemical text, but it really doesn't seem to be talking about chemistry operations at all. It just seems to be like extremely weird images that people put together to help them memorize sections of the Bible. So it's like, oh, you want to read, gospel, whatever gospel. Let's put it. There's a bull in it, so let's put a bull with human feet, and then like some apples coming out of his ears, and it's just all that kind of stuff because it really helps you get right to that point and stick it all in there.
Yeah, we were hoping one more person would join this Zoom call, which was Clarence. What's his name?
Clarence Larkin.
Clarence Larkin. So I looked at some, like printed out a bunch of Clarence Larkin drawings, and you should look him up if you're into the Book of Revelations because his work is amazing. But it doesn't do what you want it to do, which is you want to like look at a diagrammed version of the Book of Revelations and understand it better. And that's not what it
There's
does.
a guy with a sense of design.
What'd you say?
Yeah, well, I said there's a guy with a sense of design. I mean, like he's a Baptist, he was a Baptist minister, I think, right? So his interests in diagramming the text are a little bit less esoteric than like this conversation. He wouldn't be interested in some of the connections we're making, but he is, making something like that in the text, kind of pulling out patterns and making it.
Yeah, but it's specifically so how many souls are in hell.
Right. Yeah. I guess still numerological. That's pretty on. That there was a thing you were saying earlier too, or because what did you say? Oh, the four. Because think about the four creatures, and I was like, well, often the four are thought of as like the physical world. Now, four is the number of the earth or creation, or like you and I have talked about tables with four legs and whether or not that's appropriate. But the four gates, the
hell
four
no,
directions,
three-legged table is the way to go. Go on.
Yeah, but don't break the symbolism here. That's so like so that's often what four means. And I was like, I wonder if that would be relevant to the people who wrote the Bible, that there's four living creatures they could represent the four gates of reality or the created world or something like that. And then I was thinking, like, well, yep.
They go.
Well, I mean, there does seem to be like some geometric logic in here, like talking about the cube of space, or like I believe the Sefer Yetzirah talks about north, south, east, west, and up and down, or something like that.
Yes.
So it does seem to be like that. Even then, there was some understanding, like a three-dimensional breakdown of our world. Putting them into these planar.
Yeah.
modes.
So it might be the reverse. I'm not. It's above my pay grade, but so the four directions correspond to in some people correspond to the four elements. They, the four gospels were created so they could go into the four directions, right? The four directions have archangels that correspond to them, and then like there's this question of like how many can you correspond a correspondence to its correspondence? What's the exchange ratio? And then you have to know 4x, because can you translate it back and back and back until you translate it back into your original, and then has it been through Google Translate so many times that you lose the original thread? And so that would be the other question, right? Is like, what's the practical significance? Like, are you finding some value out of the idea that these like it seems like the four horsemen are going off in the four directions, and they're just decimating the fucking place, right?
Right.
That's what it seems to be. But it also seems like they're like each of them is totalizing all. Like I saw a bumper sticker yesterday. It said, remember to pillage before you burn. And so if these are war, famine, they have a specific order, right? Conquest, war, famine, and death. And it's like they have to, but we assume that it's not just like, oh, they didn't famine here because your horsemen went that way. we assume that they're universally wrecking the kingdom.
Yeah. Yeah, interesting. And they come out because the book was unsealed. Is that what caused
Oh
precipitated
man,
that
don't
event?
ask me those questions. I can't remember, but probably. And then the seven seals. So seals would also correspond to the chakras, and seals seem to also correspond to the Sphirot. But who's counting?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I just want to point out how funny it is that, like, I don't actually, off the top of my head, know the basic chronology of the Book of Revelation, and yet I'm speculating on all kinds of high-level
Well, no,
correspondences.
I don't think it's just you, because I've been thinking about this joke for when I perform live, because I make these little spiels when I perform music. And I thought about asking an audience member, like, can you just let me know the first thing that happens? Just so we're all like ready to duck and cover. Because I don't know if it's gonna start. Like, does it start with like swarms of locusts that are actually sting you like scorpions, and then you try to die for like 6 months, and they have hair like women and breastplates of iron? Like, is that the start of it? And like nobody, we should probably have that part down, but we don't. But the chronology is hard.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah,
and
you
so
just be like, oh, this whole discussion is happening in absolute, which is atemporal, so fuck it.
Yeah, I mean, it's easier to be a conspiracy theorist than just think it's happening on the physical world, but thinking things are happening only on the physical world seems to be the problem. Which
Yeah,
okay,
I mean,
so
it's
Emmett,
wiping out a third of the stars.
what'd you say?
It's wiping out like 2/3 of the stars.
Well, so Emmett Fox says that the the pale horse is like pale like terror, and that like it's the attempt to live only in the physical world. That's why he's death, and he's followed by Hades, because it's like that's just not going to go for you well in the world to come.
Yeah. I mean, it reminds me again of like the thing I was saying earlier about a view from the bottom or a view from the top, because like death and destruction from one perspective, like from the bottom, you don't want that. That sucks. But from the top, if it's death and destruction of the false, then you're like, yeah, this is great. You know what I mean? So it doesn't, they seem like opposite, but they also seem utterly correspondent to me.
Yeah, and it seems like it seems like that runs throughout the Judeo-Christian texts.
Yeah.
That they're not pulling any punches.
Yeah. And so say they're just coming from you have a book, got 7 seals on the book, right? Things that are keeping parts of the book closed. Sometimes this is represented with like wax seals, like you have like the book and the images and the lamb sitting on the book. Usually it's not the scary looking lamb for some reason with all the horns and eyes. It's just like a nice looking lamb with like the victory, like the Christ victory flag hanging out of him, sitting on a book with the seals. And usually in this, I guess usually in the images I'm referring to, the book is closed. So maybe this is pre-revelation lamb that we're looking at here. But anyway, so the book has a bunch of seals that need to be opened, right? And again, I'm just going to throw a bunch of different metaphors from potentially irrelevant other non-communicating traditions at it, just to look at what this can mean. You have a book, has information in it or something, it can be open or revealed or closed. We're in Revelation, so we're opening the book, right? Makes sense. And there's seals, like a bunch of veils or a bunch of levels you have to pass through, or maybe corresponding to the planets or the stars or the churches. And the book could be the physical world, like the book of nature, or reading the book of nature is an alchemical phrase, or like it could be the body, right? Because you open up the matter in the alchemical thing. Then you talked about the chakras, it could be like energy, veils or patches or trapped things in the body that you have to open or release.
And that would mean the opening of the seals of the wheels. But yeah, go on.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. But then when you open the book, if I'm reading this correctly, these four guys come out and just start all directions, and you're like, this is great.
Yeah. So I mean, this is purely speculative, but I was trying to think of what the because that was the other joke I was gonna say. If I'm performing live, I'm gonna be like, did anybody see like an angel on the way here with like 1 foot on the land and 1 foot on the water, holding a tiny book? Because what it says is that he gives you the book and then you eat it, and then it tastes like honey in your mouth, but it's bitter in your stomach. And that's weird, right? Because most of you'd assume that spiritual life would be about, yeah, that's the right face to make there, because you'd assume that spiritual life would be um, bitter in the beginning and sweet at the end, as opposed to things of this world, which are sweet at the beginning and bitter at the end, roughly speaking. Yep. So it's weird that the little book that he's offered in Revelations is sweet at the beginning and bitter at the end. But I think, you know what's sweet at the beginning and bitter at the end? The 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 New Testament, because it starts with this really gentle Christ who's forgiving of all people, and then it ends with this fucking guy with a sword in his mouth.
Yeah.
So that's kind of like similar to what you're saying, is like you do all the work and then you're ready for it, and then this havoc is wrecked. And I don't think that's necessarily the end of one's spiritual journey, but it does seem like when you're ready for, this is a book about the wrath of God. There's a meaning for wrath within the tantric tradition, which Herbert Gunther translates as high volume compassion.
Damn, that's great. That's great. Yeah, no, that. I think that tracks with my reading of this book also. That pithy little tidbit right there. But also, I mean, like if you read it, like say you're reading it with like the book, you know, it's like something bad you're not supposed to do, and God's like, don't open the book. Then if it would make sense, it would be sweet at the beginning because this is to the senses, and bitter in your where it actually matters, which is giving you nourishment in your, you know.
Yeah, but he says, eat the book.
Yeah. Yeah, I remember that part actually. That's very good.
This whole thing is so psychedelic, and I've never sat down and read the Book of Revelations. I've listened to Johnny Cash's reading of it several times.
Okay. Nice. Yeah. Yes. You're
good. Okay. So I'll quote two thinkers, which is Tracton Rinpoche wrote a review in Tricycle that crashed the Tricycle website one time. Because it said he was reviewing a book and he said, like, I'm paraphrasing, like when you order a 6-piece chicken nuggets, you know that there's chicken in them somewhere, but you don't know where. And so it's like, read this book and you know there's Dharma in it somewhere. There's probably Dharma, but you don't know where.
Oh wow. What was his review about?
I can't remember. I would hate to say the Lama because I will say the wrong one. So I apologize for that. But it may be Googleable, and maybe I'll have that information for people in the future. And then the other is Zongsa Rinpoche does this great talk on relationships, and he says, I don't think there was any merit in this conversation, but if there was, we should dedicate
it. Awesome.
So very cool. So there's that. Anything else for us, Seth?
I don't know how to follow that one.
Yeah, you can't really. So thank you all for joining us. Seth's work is really, really beautiful, and he's trying to throw a lot of these stuff in with comic book illustrations and tattooing. So you could check him at Paralysis or Death on Instagram with a dot somewhere in it.
Yeah, but don't message me.
Yeah, don't message that. Okay, thanks for being the e-girl that you are.
Yeah.
All right, we'll see you at the end of times.
Bye, everybody.